This is a flashback episode that I made in 2021, almost exactly 2 years before the arrest of a man named Keffe D for Tupac's murder in September of 2023. Back when I made this, I was laying out why the case should be closed, and since then, of course, they've made an arrest. So now this flashback episode shows basically how we got here. This is how Las Vegas Metro Police closed what was, in my opinion, the most famous unsolved murder in history. September 2021 marks the 25th anniversary of the murder of Tupac in Las Vegas. And here's a fact that may shock a lot of people. The Las Vegas Metro Police Department has known who did it for years. A Crip from Compton named Orlando Anderson, aka Baby Lane, was the prime suspect within weeks. And this case should have been put to rest when his uncle, Keffe D, confessed to a federal task force 12 years later about their gang's involvement and that Anderson had pulled the trigger. It has always been Orlando Anderson and the South Side Compton Crips who killed Tupac. There are no other legitimate suspects, period. So then why haven't the police in Las Vegas closed the case? Well, in this episode, I'm going to tell you a story that's never been told. It's the inside story of how, just 3 years ago, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department nearly did close the Tupac murder case. First, let's recap the facts of the case against the South Side Crips for Tupac's murder. In the summer of 1996, one of the Bloods in Suge Knight's inner circle at death row, named Trayvon Lane, had a beef with a Crip rival named Orlando Anderson, which had reached a boiling point during a fight at the Lakewood Mall just a few miles from Compton, where Anderson and some other Crips had tried to take Trayvon's death row medallion. From what I've heard from a couple of sources, it was decided after this incident that the next time the Bloods aligned with death row saw Orlando Anderson, it was on. And unfortunately, that next time was inside the MGM Grand on September 7th, 1996, as thousands of people exited a Mike Tyson fight at the hotel's arena. What happened next is well known, but also somewhat misunderstood. So here's my interpretation based on talking to people who were there. Trayvon Lane and the other gang members from Compton who were with Suge and Tupac as they came out of the Tyson fight spotted Orlando Anderson in the crowd. Anderson and his uncle, Keffe D, had picked up tickets from a Rollin' 60s Crip when they got to Vegas. But since they were scalped, the seats weren't together, so they had split up and agreed to meet back up at the hotel's food court after the fight. So Anderson was either on his way to the food court or had paused to see if he could spot any of his friends in the crowd when the death row entourage saw him. So Tupac then sees that his friends are kind of looking at this guy in the crowd, and he knew about the beef with Anderson, but he didn't know what the guy looked like. And this is where the infamous claim that Trayvon Lane whispered in Tupac's ear and then Pac took off after Anderson came from, as if Trayvon told him to go punch the dude, which I don't think is what happened. I believe that Tupac was simply told something like, that's the guy we've been talking about, and not realizing that Pac would just take off on his own and lay Anderson out. But that's what Tupac did, and most of it, after he'd thrown the first couple of punches and knocked Anderson to the ground, was captured on MGM security cameras. There's Anderson on the ground, as the rest of Tupac's group join in the beatdown. There's Suge Knight with a little kick that would violate his probation and send him to prison months later. There's Tupac trying to get another kick in. There's Neckbone in black and Buntry in white with the hat, both well-known guys from the neighborhood who were associated with death row. And that appears to be Trayvon, dressed kind of like Buntry in a white shirt and a fedora, but with dark pants instead of white. So casino security are in the middle of it almost immediately, shielding Anderson from the kicks. And then the death row entourage hightails it, led by Tupac and Suge. and the network of security cameras tracks their movement through the huge casino. This is an interesting moment as they're walking through the casino. Neckbone gives Trayvon Lane a little punch. Kind of like, we did it, man. We got him back. As the death row entourage passes through the casino, they pick up more and more onlookers, and it nearly becomes like a stampede. And then death row disappears into the desert night. But the damage is done. Tupac's fate is sealed. He just punched a killer, and he's gonna die for it. Meanwhile, Orlando Anderson is still stuck inside the casino talking to police. His uncle Keefe at the food court hears about the fight.
We went to eat. We was eating, and man, they came and said, he just beat up Lane. And we was in the hotel, at the MGM at the restaurant.
Also, there is a Harlem club owner named Zip Martin, who's in business with the South Side Crips and who splits his time between New York and LA. So one of the New Yorkers who's with Zip, this guy, is sent to get Anderson away from the cops and bring him to the food court where they can regroup. A witness who was present would eventually tell police in LA that he overheard one of the guys with the Crips say, "Fuck that shit. What Tupac think this is? We gangbang out here." And Zip allegedly said, "We have artillery out here," referencing a gun that he supposedly had in his Mercedes out in the parking lot. That gun would reportedly be used in Tupac's murder. Orlando Anderson's friend, Corey Edwards, claimed when he was interviewed by LA police in 1997 that he'd seen Anderson near a bar after the fight and that Anderson didn't appear to be injured or too upset about what happened. Now, conspiracy theorists have claimed that this encounter with Edwards gives Anderson an alibi for Tupac's murder. But that didn't happen for another 2 hours. And if you read the rest of Edwards' statement, he claims that they then walked away from Anderson, and a little time passed, and then Edwards left with his girlfriend and went up to their room and had an argument. And when he came down later, he learned from someone else that Tupac had been shot, and that he never saw Anderson again while in Vegas. So that's not an alibi. And then a few years ago, Edwards told attorney Ben Crump on A&E's Who Killed Tupac that the truth was that after the beating, Anderson was upset. And Edwards tried to tell him, "We can catch up with all this when we get back to Compton." But that Anderson looked at him and said, "Dog, if it was you, you wouldn't want to wait till we got home." To which Edwards supposedly said, "You're right." So this is how things allegedly went down, according to Orlando Anderson's uncle Keefe D., who told this story to a federal task force over a decade ago.
He told me in the lobby that he had some Jimmys.
Some what?
He had a Jimmy in that Benz. Shit, it was right there. This is a perfect opportunity, baby.
That was Zip talking?
Yeah.
Because of what happened with Lane?
Yeah. There was a few New Yorkers, though, who was with Zip. Like, man, y'all need some help? We got this.
And then the Crips and some of the New Yorkers, not including Zip, get into a van and a white Cadillac and go to Suge's Club 662, which is about 2.5 miles off the Vegas Strip, where Tupac will be performing in a show later that night. And that had been advertised. Everyone knew about it.
And then what happened?
I got in the van with the busters. You know what I'm saying?
These 2 cars go to 662.
Yeah, the van and the Cadillac.
And in the parking lot at Club 662, the Crips lie in wait. But after a while, they decide to leave when they realize that police are there doing traffic control, and the Bloods doing security at the club are starting to recognize them. This claim by Keefe was confirmed by a former Compton Pyro named Mob James, who was working security at the door and spotted the Southsiders in the Cadillac.
I was out on the parking lot in front of the club. I see the Cadillac. That's South Side right there. They was parked like right where the driveway is. When you go in the driveway to go to the back, they stopped right there. But at first he had like as if they was finna come in.
They didn't show up. We waited about 15, 20 minutes. They didn't show up. So it's like, let's go get some liquor.
They saw us there. So he probably just like, no, maybe this ain't the right time. This is whoop whoop. They probably seen all the police that was around over there, and they drove off.
So the Crips leave. And by this point, it seems like half the guys want to go back to the Strip and party. You know, sitting around in a parking lot isn't what they came to Vegas on fight night to do. So at a liquor store, they split up. And Keefe allegedly gets out of the van and into the white Cadillac with his nephew, Orlando Anderson, and two other guys. Terrence Brown, a.k.a. T. Brown, is the driver, and DeAndre Smith, a.k.a. Big Dre, is in the backseat with Orlando Anderson.
We stopped at the liquor store. I got out the van with their ass and jumped in the Cadillac. Them motherfuckers busted, they scared.
So the van and the Cadillac part ways. And on their way back to the Strip, Keefe and Anderson and the other guys in the white Cadillac encounter Suge and Tupac and their entourage coming the other way.
So we like, there they go. Made a U-turn. We wasn't supposed to make a U-turn. We just wanted a U-turn. They was in the middle lane. We just pulled up on the side and checked every car to see where they was.
And they catch up with the entourage at the next major intersection. And Keefe supposedly hands a gun to the backseat, which Orlando Anderson grabs. And Anderson fires the shots that ultimately kill Tupac and wound Suge.
I gave it to Dre. Dre was like, no. And Lane's like, give it. Popped it to him. He leaned over on the window. We rolled down the window, popped.
And then the Crips speed off into the night. And Tupac dies from his wounds at a local hospital 6 days later. So that's how Tupac was killed. And here's how law enforcement came to know this. First of all, the Blood gang members who are around death row, they knew that night that it was the South Side Crips that did it. According to Keefe, Suge looked right at him when the shooting happened.
You say Suge looks over, he sees you?
Yeah.
He looks right at you?
Yeah, he looked at me.
Okay. Why are you looking right at me?
Fucking known each other since we were 7, 8 years old.
Suge and Keefe had played football on the same team as kids. Suge was the center, and Keefe was the tailback. Keefe used to go to team parties at Suge's parents' house. So they'd known each other since they were kids. And a witness even told the FBI a couple weeks later that Suge had told him that he knew who the shooters were and that they were Compton Crips from the South Side.
Right at that point, after the shooting, they came to the club, South Side just dumped on us. And that's all was said. He just went for the direct target. He went straight after who hit him. Retaliation is a motherfucker.
On September 13th, which was the same day that Tupac passed away at the hospital in Las Vegas, a witness told law enforcement that after the shooting, they'd attended a meeting at Compton's Looters Park, and there Trayvon Lane, misspelled Lang here, told them that Keefe D was involved in the shooting. Unfortunately, though, none of the Bloods who knew who was behind the shooting were willing to cooperate with Vegas police. For example, here's a field interview card for Buntree, Mob James's brother, from the Las Vegas police at the scene saying that Buntree was uncooperative and declined to make a report. They wanted to handle it their own way, back home, on the streets of Compton. And back in Compton, it was the worst kept secret that the Southside Crips had killed Tupac. Here's one Southside Crip informant describing how they practically bragged about it the next day back home.
Dre and Orlando, they came back bragging about what happened out there. They seen Tupac and Big Suge, I think, in a BMW, and he said he let off on him.
What does let off on him mean to you?
Shooting a person. Like it was a big old joke or something. Like it was a big joke. You can tell when a person's nervous. They were nervous when they got back, talking, you can tell they had nervousness,
Who besides yourself down there knows, for one, knows about these guys killing Tupac?
Shit, pretty sure everybody around there knew about it.
Kelly Cooper, one of the original detectives on the Biggie murder case, said that even he had informants telling him that Anderson was bragging about killing Tupac.
I had a person I was talking to who told me that she was related to Orlando Anderson, and she told me that at family gathering, Orlando Anderson would brag about killing Tupac.
His name just started coming out because he was taking credit for it. He started telling people he did that.
So police in LA are hearing stories like this from their informants. And then a gang war explodes there with Bloods trying to get revenge on the Crips. So Compton PD launches a huge raid on dozens of gang member houses on both sides of the conflict, trying to end the war. And Orlando Anderson is taken into custody, and they hand him over to Las Vegas police. They hand Tupac's killer over to Vegas on a silver platter. Just a few months after Tupac's murder, a Las Vegas Metro homicide sergeant told the media, "We consider Mr. Anderson to be a suspect in the shooting." So they definitely knew. But of course, Anderson denies everything, and Vegas can't build a case, in part, I think, because they didn't trust Compton PD, but also because police in Vegas didn't know anything about Compton gangs, any more than Compton PD would know about gangs in Las Vegas. And so, the case went cold, and Tupac's killer walked free. Orlando Anderson was eventually killed at a car wash in Compton, barely a year and a half later, in a shootout that he supposedly instigated over a drug dispute, and he took 2 more lives with him when he died. Orlando's friend, Big Dre Smith, who was in the back seat with him, died from medical issues in 2004. And T. Brown, the driver, was killed at a marijuana dispensary in Compton in 2015, along with the shop's owner, in a double murder that's still unsolved. And Keefe lived to tell police about what happened a dozen years later. And after my film, Murder Rap, came out with his taped statement to Greg Kading's task force, Keefe went public himself and has told this story again and again. In at least 3 interviews on YouTube, including one on Vlad TV that's been viewed millions of times, and on BET's Death Row Chronicles, and even in a book about his life that came out a couple years ago. And Universal created a 10-episode scripted series called Unsolved, starring Josh Duhamel and Bokeem Woodbine, dramatizing all of this information and Keefe's statements. In fact, that's Keefe's character on the left in that show. I mean, the answer to this case is on Netflix. So fast forward to 2017. I joined BET's Death Row Chronicles as a consultant, and they got Keefe D to sit down for a new interview. And at that point in time, he hadn't done any of these other media interviews yet, so it was a big development. And though he worded it carefully, he went through this story again. To me, it was a huge risk because his statement to Kading's task force had been protected by a proffer agreement, which meant that while he could still potentially be charged for the crime, they wouldn't be able to use his statement against him. So it's kind of like limited immunity. But for anything he says outside of that original statement that he made to them years ago, he is completely exposed, so he has to be careful what he says. So I waited for the series to air in early 2018, and then I contacted the Homicide Division at the Las Vegas Metro Police Department. Because even though this was their case, and this program had just aired on national television, I was pretty sure they had no idea. And I was right. They apparently didn't. So back in 2018, I got a response from the detective who was in charge of the Tupac case at that time. And in May of that year, he and his sergeant came to my home in LA and I gave them a statement. And my position is they don't have to make an arrest, necessarily, but they can close the case. How many times does someone have to tell you what happened before you believe them? I feel like if this was any other case with this many witness statements all pointing the same direction, including someone putting themselves there at the scene, would any other case still be open today? No way. And after that meeting with the detective from Vegas in 2018, for a while it felt like there really was momentum in this case again. That detective and I exchanged dozens of emails, and I still knew that it was going to be an uphill battle. So I launched an online petition, and it got 4,000 signatures. I was just doing whatever I could. And a few weeks later, this headline on July 3rd, 2018, sent shockwaves through the news media. I wasn't the source for this story, so it told me that something really was happening because the reporter's source was someone inside the police department in Vegas. And then other outlets ran with the story. And my petition even got a headline. And 2 days later, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department issued a partial denial, admitting that we are aware of the statements made in the BET interview regarding the Tupac case. As a result of those statements, we have spent the last several months reviewing the case in its entirety. Various reports that an arrest warrant is about to be submitted are inaccurate. This case still remains an open homicide case, which is ridiculous. And that's my point. My goal from the moment I released Murder Rap in 2015 was for Las Vegas police to close the Tupac murder case. Arrest or no arrest, they know what happened. And it doesn't matter that Orlando Anderson is dead, you can still clear the case. It's called cleared other. It means you know who did it, but prosecution isn't possible, either because the victims won't cooperate, as with the Mark Anthony Bell beating in LA in 1995, or because the suspect is dead, like Orlando Anderson. It means you know who's responsible, and you no longer consider it an open case. So basically, in this situation, it's the truth. It could still be reopened later if new information comes to light, but for now, officially, the case is cleared. Nobody's working it anymore. And in my opinion, that is unofficially Las Vegas' stance on the Tupac murder case, but they won't say it publicly. And law enforcement's statement to the press in these situations is always the same. It's an open case, and they don't comment on open cases. But I don't accept that. Fear of a potential media circus shouldn't prevent a police department from clearing a case. And I think the detective that I met with would like to close the case. Clearing cases is what detectives do. But I also recognize that he has new murders to investigate, with family and friends of those victims in constant contact, demanding answers, and those have to take priority. I get that. In my opinion, it's probably a political decision being made at higher levels in the justice system in Las Vegas. I think it's a tourist town, and I think they didn't like the headlines 25 years ago, and they don't like them today. And it's easier to keep the status quo of pretending you don't know what happened than it is to explain that you do know. But it's been 25 years. It's time to put this case to rest.
The record reflects that Mr. Davis is present in custody. Mr. DiGiacomo and Mr. Palal are here on behalf of the state. Mr. Davis, sir, have you retained counsel to represent you in this case?
Yes, ma'am.